Hello adventure riders from around the world. If you're ever interested from motorcycles, traveling, speeding, racing or whatever, probably you have seen the movie The Fastest Indian with Anthony Hopkins. Me, I haven't seen it until I came to New Zealand, but since I came, I've got the chance first to watch the movie with my friend Jan. Then on the next day we went to the beach where actually he was practicing with his motorcycle. On the third day I was even able to see the real bike in one of the shops here in Invercargill. And finally, I've got a perfect opportunity to meet one guy who actually know Burt Munro in person. And this is what the video is about. Stay with me. Welcome back in the channel. As I promised at the beginning, this will be very interesting interview with Alistair. It's absolutely my pleasure to meet you, and absolutely thank you very much for letting me to make this interview with you to talk about Burt Munro. So I really hope to say all of this to the people who really want to know more about it. Could you please tell me a few words about yourself and what is your relation with Burt Munro?
G'day, my name is Alistair Michael, and I am currently 76 years of age, and we're talking about a guy who's been dead for about 35-40 years. I first got to know Burt through my father, who was Burt's engineer for many years, and I've known about the Burt Munro name in our family ever since I've been about 7 or 8 years of age. So he's always been around as far as that's concerned for a long time for me.
Okay, Alistair, so you actually know Burt Munro from a long time. And who actually was he? Who was Burt Munro?
I've always known Burt as a man who spent all his life working on his motorcycle, trying to make his motorcycle go faster all the time. He achieved something that nobody else in the world, regardless of how much money they've got, would be able to ever do again. And that was to get a machine that has a top speed. In his instance, his bike, when he bought it, had a top speed of about 50 miles per hour. And over a period of many years, he managed to achieve doubling its speed to 100 mile an hour. Still the same basic bike, but with doing modifications to the motor. And then not only did he make that amazing feat happen, but by continuing work over many more years, he got the speed doubled again from 100 mile an hour to 200 mile an hour. Now that's something very important, because there'd be nobody today who could get any sort of vehicle, no matter whether it's a high-powered car or a motorcycle, and then get its speed doubled to what it was when it was new, and then double that speed again. It would just be a physical impossibility.
Well, it was really impressive what he has done. But what do you think that Burt will say now if he see all of this madness about his records and everything like that? Because you know him in person. What he will say if he's able to see all of this?
Honestly, he wouldn't believe it. He just couldn't believe that he'd achieved so much fame since his death, because Burt was always looking for the next dollar or a couple of dollars to fund his next trip to the salt flats in America to attempt another record attempt over there. And as I say, he was always looking for another dollar from somebody, and he's always on the bones of his backside all the time from a financial point of view. And for him to see it today, and to see, for instance, the Southland Motorcycle Club run an event every year in memory of Burt, and it takes in speedway, it takes in road racing, it takes in beach racing, off-road motocross racing, every facet of the motorcycle sport is held in Invercargill, including a very big event for guys on their road bikes coming here. So there's thousands of guys arrive every year to partake in the various events around the Burt Munro week in Invercargill.
So he wouldn't believe it. He will be surprised even, yeah?
Oh, he wouldn't believe it. He couldn't believe it, honestly. He really couldn't believe it.
Was he a good man, or just do people like him that when he was alive, or what they thought about him when he was alive?
Depending on who you talk to, some people would, he was sort of well known as a womanizer for a start, so that was one of his attributes, I guess. He was a great after-dinner speaker. He had a very good general knowledge about all sorts of things, and I'm probably the wrong person to be talking to at the moment about some of the exploits that he went through in America, for instance. He was quite cheeky in lots of ways, and he would bowl into places and start asking questions and expecting things to happen and what have you. So yeah, that was one of the things he was...
Well, it is what it is. People never really realize what they have at the moment or what they are able to do until it's too late. But anyway, I have another one question. Can you tell me how accurate the movie Fastest Indian was, and how good Anthony Hopkins was to play Burt Munro?
Well, when I first saw the movie for the first time, The World's Fastest Indian, I was absolutely gobsmacked about the role that Anthony Hopkins played as Burt Munro. I would have thought that he had been around the man for 40 or 50 years, because he'd got all his mannerisms down to the last everything. You couldn't fault him. You'd think that he'd been sitting on Burt's shoulder all his life and learning all the words that were Burt Munro. So yeah, as far as Anthony Hopkins was concerned, he did a really 100% job in taking off the person of Burt Munro.
Was the movie really accurate to rely on the true stories, or there are some nonsense?
It was pretty much accurate, with a fair bit of there's the odd little bit of thing that they put in to make it, but it didn't alter the story at all. It still portrayed Burt Munro as the person that he really was.
All right, that's great. I'm glad that they did it absolutely perfect. But what people don't know about Burt Munro? Tell me a few stories. What they don't know about him.
Well, there's one thing that comes to mind with Burt Munro that not many people would know about, and they'd only get to know this either by travelling behind him on the open road when he's out driving, or actually being in the vehicle with him. Well, when I was 12, 13 years of age, Burt was going to go to Christchurch in New Zealand to attempt breaking the New Zealand speed record for the class of motorcycle that he was on. As my father was an engineer for all these years, there was my mother, my father, myself and Burt in the car, and we're heading to Christchurch, which is it was a distance of about 300 miles. Now, on behind the car was Burt's motorcycle with a full fairing, bright red, very impressive looking motorcycle, and it was tied down onto this very bare trailer, which was just a very basic chassis with two wheels, and the motorcycle was tied down onto the chassis. Now, Burt couldn't bear to be stuck behind somebody on the open road. If there was a car in front of him, he had to pass it, whether there was yellow lines, or there was a corner, or on the brow of a hill, or if it was raining, blowing. Burt couldn't bear travelling behind people, and it was just horrifying as a passenger. You're sitting there wondering if any minute, next minute, you're going to be killed because you've ran into a truck coming around a corner, or something like that, because Burt's been on the wrong side of the road passing another vehicle. So it was really scary driving with Burt Munro.
So he was a terrible driver.
He was a terrible driver. He was a
great racer, a terrible driver.
And everybody used to say that Burt would die in a horrific crash somewhere. So it's interesting to learn how he did die. So yeah.
How actually he did die?
Burt died in his armchair one night at home watching television.
Okay. Good. Tell me a few words about the beach, because when we spoke last time, you explained me these stories, how he need always someone to push the bike, to start the bike on the beach. Tell me a few words about it.
Well, today with motorcycles, we take electric starts for granted. But with Burt's bike being an old Indian machine with a 3-speed gearbox, electric starts weren't part of the scene. And to get the motorcycle going for a start, it had to be push started. Now, that's not too big a problem if you don't have a full fairing on the bike. But with Burt's bike, it had a full fairing on it. That means he tucks himself inside the fairing, and he relies on a couple of people to push start the bike to get it going. And So quite often Burt would ring me at work and ask me if I could come out, and myself and my wife Anne could come out to help him start the bike, because he wanted to do a test run on Oreti beach. So we'd get out there, and the scenario would be that Burt would get into the bike, and he'd be all tucked in there, and Anne and myself would push. When he was ready to go, he'd say, "Okay, push," and so we'd be pushing hard against the fairing of the bike. And we'd be pushing, and he'd be yelling out, "Faster, faster," and we'd be pushing our hard out, and at the last minute, when we didn't expect it, he'd let the clutch out, and the bike would fire up, and of course, with all our pressure on the fairing of the bike would shoot off, and we would go face planted into the sand of Oreti beach, as he's off down the beach on the bike.
And my last question is about the offer from Burt Munro. He actually asked you to go and ride his bike, yeah? Can you explain me what happened, why he asked you, and why did you refuse to ride the bike?
I guess as Burt got older, his health deteriorated, and it came to the point where he could no longer, he realised he could no longer ride the Munro Special, as he called it. He called it the Special, the Munro Special. And he was convalescing with one of his daughters who were living out at Waipahi, which is not far away from Gore, where I live in New Zealand. And I was operating at that stage. I had my own motorcycle business in Gore. And one day this lady came into the shop, and I didn't know who she was, although I knew that Burt had daughters. And she introduced herself and said that she had somebody out in the car that wanted to speak to me. So I went out to the car, and it was Burt. Now, Burt was sitting in the back of the car, and he said to me, he says, "Look," he says, I want to know something. He says, "I'm not going to be able to ride the Special anymore, and I wanted to know if you would ride it for me." Now, that was the question. I was then thinking, well, I've got a wife to think about, I've got 3 small kids at home, I've got a small motorcycle business I'm running. I really can't afford to bend myself by falling off a motorcycle at 200 mile an hour. So that night I went home, and my wife and I, we talked about it, and that's what we talked about, and we both agreed it wasn't a good idea to accept Burt's offer. So next day I phoned Burt. And let him know my answer, and he took it no problem. He didn't try to change my mind or anything like that, but I could guess Burt could see that by having somebody a whole lot lighter in the bike than what he was, he would be able to extract more miles per hour out of the bike, because Burt was always trying to lighten the bike all the time to get the extra speed that he got over the years, but it came to the point where there was just nothing left on the bike to lighten, and the only thing that would be left to lighten would be the actual rider. And with me being 3 or 4 stone lighter than Burt could see great advantages in me riding his bike rather than him.
Thank you very much, Alistair. It was a real pleasure to meet a legend like you. Thank you for agreeing to give all of this interview for the curious people around the world.
Lovely, lovely talking to you, and it's been an opportunity that I've never ever had before as well, so it's something new for me too.
Absolutely. Now we can turn off the camera, drink tea and eat cookies, yeah? That's it, guys. I hope this was interesting for you. So, it was absolutely my pleasure. Don't forget to subscribe, and see you next time. Ciao.